Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into something pretty profound, maybe even contradictory, about modern life. Think about this. Most people, like a huge majority, say they're interested in spirituality. But at the same time, there's this widespread feeling of spiritual emptiness, almost like a national hunger for something more.
It is a fascinating paradox, isn't it? And our sources for this deep dive, they go right at that. They explore how divine love, is meant to be this powerful, resurrecting life force. But they also look at how these dominant forces in society seem to have either, well, co-opted it or really watered down what genuine spiritual connection means.
Okay, so our mission today is to unpack what these different sources are suggesting about like real spiritual awakening and the transformative power of love itself. And right off the bat, we hit this core tension. How can a culture that one source actually calls dead to love? How can it be resurrected, especially when it feels like society has gone so far down this road of, secular individualism, worshiping what another source calls the twin gods of money and power?
That's the critical question, yeah. And our deep dive jumps right into it, particularly looking at this clash between love and materialism. The sources suggest that this interest in spirituality you mentioned, it's constantly co-opted by the powerful forces of materialism and hedonistic consumerism.
Yeah.
It's almost like our deepest longings get hijacked, redirected.
That makes a lot of sense. And one key voice here is Eric Fromm, the psychoanalyst. What's his main argument in The Art of Loving? It seems so relevant still.
Oh, incredibly relevant. From writing back in the 50s, basically argued that the principle underlying capitalistic society and the principle of love are incompatible. He saw society as being run by a managerial bureaucracy and people, motivated by mass suggestion to just produce more, consume more, not for any real purpose, but like as purposes in themselves. And this constant focus on consuming more, our sources stress, it just distracts us from any real spiritual hunger. We're constantly told, that every need can be met just by buying more stuff.
Yeah, it's insidious, isn't it, how consumerism sort of slides in to replace meaning? Our sources bring up that really striking artwork by Barbara Kruger, the one saying, "I shop, therefore I am." It shows just how deep that idea has sunk in, that people start thinking they are what they own.
Exactly.
And that, the sources say, just makes the sense of spiritual emptiness even worse. It's like this unspoken message. If you don't feel enough love, well, you can always go shopping.
Which leads straight to a really crucial insight from these sources, this national spiritual hunger. It springs from a keen awareness of the emotional lack in our lives.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, it's a response to lovelessness.
Okay, so everyone's feeling this hunger, this lack. Why aren't traditional places filling that gap, like church or temple?
Well, the sources tackle that directly. They say going to church or temple has not satisfied this hunger. The argument is that organized religion has often just, accommodated secular demands, meaning it ends up interpreting spiritual life in ways that actually uphold the values of a production-centered commodity culture.
So it starts looking like the system it should be questioning.
Pretty much,
Yeah.
yeah. And that critique doesn't stop there. It extends to New Age spirituality, too. Our sources point out that many well-known New Age teachers link their ideas to a metaphysics of daily life that extols the virtues of wealth, privilege, and power.
So enlightenment gets tied up with being rich and successful.
That's the implication, yeah. It can start to sound like that.
That's a really important point, this New Age logic where maybe it's suggested that the poor have chosen to be poor or something like that.
Right.
Our sources argue pretty strongly that this kind of thinking removes from all of us who are privileged the burden of accountability. Instead of building community, it actually fosters alienation and estrangement. It pushes people apart.
And beyond that, the sources also look at religious fundamentalism, how it often tends to shape and interpret religious thought to make it conform to and legitimize a conservative status quo.
Using religion to justify certain stances.
Exactly. Using it to justify support for things like imperialism, militarism, sexism, racism, homophobia. And in doing so, our sources argue it denies the unifying message of love that is at the heart of every major religious tradition.
Wow. And to really illustrate that, the sources bring up Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter to American Christians. That's powerful stuff.
Incredibly powerful.
He really calls out believers for supporting segregation, doesn't he? Calls it a blatant denial of the unity which we have in Christ.
He does. He argues it substitutes an I-it relationship for the I-thou relationship.
Treating people like things, basically.
Yeah. Reducing people to objects, problems, not seeing their full humanity. King said it relegates persons to the status of things. It scars the soul and degrades the personality.
It destroys community and makes brotherhood impossible. It's just a stark example of how institutions can lose their way, right? Corrupt their own core message.
Definitely. But, despite all these critiques, these misuses, the sources do pivot. They find hope. They highlight this genuine concern for spiritual awakening expressed counterculturally.
Okay, so where do they see that hope?
In action, really. They give examples like American Buddhists working in solidarity to free Tibet, or think about the many Christian-based organizations that provide support in the way of food and shelter for the needy globally. These aren't just, abstract beliefs. They're love in action. It offers a different kind of hope.
That feels like a really important shift. And timing-wise, just over a decade after Fromm's book, Martin Luther King Jr. published Strength to Love. How do the sources connect King's view of love to these critiques we've been discussing?
Well, King, much like Fromm, saw love as this core spiritual force that unites and binds all life. And he also critiqued capitalism, materialism, and the violence used to enforce exploitation and dehumanization. He saw the connections. For King, love wasn't some soft, weak feeling. In a 1967 lecture, he said, "When I speak of love, I am not speaking of some sentimental and weak response." He said, "I am speaking of that force which all of the great religions have seen as the supreme unifying principle of life.
Wow.
Love is somehow the key that unlocks the door which leads to ultimate reality." He even brought in St. John, "Let us love one another, for love is God."
That's a radically different vision of love.
Yeah.
Active, unifying.
Completely.
And there's another voice the sources mention here, Thomas Merton. How does his essay, Love and Need, add to this?
Merton really doubles down on this idea of active love. He writes that love is, in fact, an intensification of life, a completeness, a fullness, a wholeness of life. And he said something profound. We do not become fully human until we give ourselves to each other in love.
So love isn't just personal fulfillment, it's essential to being human.
Right.
Through connection.
That's the idea. It blossoms when we connect.
Now here's something striking, the sources point out. From Small, King, Merton, they all stress love as an active force, something that should lead us into greater communion with the world. It's positioned as the primary way we end domination and oppression. The sources call this a politicization of love. Why do you think that angle, that politicization, feels kind of absent from a lot of spiritual talk today?
That's a really good question. And it's a stark contrast, isn't it, to what our sources call the dangerous narcissism fostered by spiritual rhetoric that pays so much attention to individual self-improvement and so little to the practice of love within the context of community. When spirituality gets packaged as a commodity, it becomes, like they say, no different from an exercise program. It's all about my peace, my journey.
My growth, my abundance, not our well-being.
Exactly. It misses that communal active dimension.
So the real takeaway is action. Action driven by love.
Precisely. Parker Palmer, in The Active Life, really nails this. He writes, "To be fully alive is to act." And he understands action as any way that we can co-create reality with other beings and the spirit.
Co-create reality?
Yeah. He says action is the visible form of an invisible spirit, but it needs conscious practice, a willingness to unite the way we think with the way we act.
It's not enough to just think lovingly. You have to act lovingly.
You have to embody it.
Okay, let's unpack that. Let's really define what a spirit-filled life looks like based on these sources. What's the absolute core principle?
At its heart, the sources define spiritual life as being about commitment to a way of thinking and behaving that honors principles of interbeing and interconnectedness.
Interbeing, like we're all connected.
Yeah, exactly. Like we're all threads in the same fabric. What affects one affects all. And that understanding has to guide how we act.
And this idea of the divine spirit, how do the sources talk about that? Is it God or?
They frame it quite broadly. Divine spirit is described as that sort of place of mystery in our lives, where forces that are beyond our human desire or will can alter things, guide us, direct us. You might call it soul, God, the beloved, higher consciousness, higher power. The name isn't the main point.
So the commitment is the key thing.
The commitment, yeah. A commitment to spiritual life means embracing this eternal principle that love is all, everything, our true destiny.
Okay, but how does that work practically? When we look around and see, as one source puts it, life-threatening nihilism, violence, hunger, how does love anchor us then?
That's the crucial role, according to the sources. Knowing love, or the hope of knowing love is the anchor that keeps us from falling into that sea of despair. It's the counterweight. They quote Jack Kornfield saying, "The longing for love and the movement of love is underneath all of our activities. It's fundamental."
So if that's true, spirituality isn't just like a hobby, it's the source of strength.
Exactly. The sources really stress that all other spiritual teachings are in vain if we cannot love. What matters is how we live. It boils down to that.
It makes me think of that personal reflection in the sources about going back to core teachings on love, like 1 Corinthians, the love chapter.
Mm.
How in really difficult environments where love wasn't valued, revisiting those ideas provided comfort, renewal, kept the heart open.
It's about returning to that core truth again and again. And that highlights a key difference the sources make. Gaining knowledge about spirituality is not the same as a commitment to a spiritual life. It's not just intellectual.
Right.
Cornfield says, we must make certain our path is connected with our heart.
Hmm.
It has to be felt lived.
Absolutely. And the sources mention that when we start to experience the sacred in everyday life, even the tough stuff, it brings this different quality of concentration and engagement.
Yeah, and even suffering.
Mm-hmm.
They suggest that suffering, when accepted and embraced, is also a place of peace and possibility.
Like compost, abundant waste that we use to make new growth possible.
Exactly. It reminds you of that biblical idea, right? To count it all joy when facing trials, finding the potential within the hardship.
And importantly, this doesn't have to happen within organized religion, does it?
Not at all. The sources are clear on that.
Yeah.
Spiritual practice does not need to be connected to organized religion in order to be meaningful. Communing with nature, meditation, prayer, simple daily acts of service, these are all powerful spiritual practices.
It really comes down to love then.
Ultimately, yes. The sources conclude, all awakening to love is spiritual awakening.
Okay, so wrapping this up. What we've really explored today is that genuine spirituality, the kind that's separate from consumerism or rigid rules, it's fundamentally about an active commitment, a commitment to love, to seeing how we're all interconnected. And that commitment acts as an anchor against despair, and it's the path to becoming whole.
Yeah, it shifts the whole focus from just believing something passively to actively living it, engaging with the world through these principles.
Exactly. Which brings us to a final thought, a challenge for you listening right now. Given everything we've discussed, all these insights from our sources, how can you foster this politicization of love? How can you move beyond just personal growth and actively engage in communion, in community, and maybe even push back against domination and oppression in your own life? What would it actually look like for you to consciously break those mainstream cultural taboos that silence or erase our passion for spiritual practice? Something to think about.